Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. That's right, week 2 has officially concluded. Time to go ahead and recap all the goodness that happened during the last week of action and start to move on to week 3. So hope you guys, got those fantasy W's. And if not, new week, new you. Let's start grinding and get back in that win column. So I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. Again, thank you for joining us and joining me as they do every single Monday, Paul Charchian and Chris Allen. Fellas, how's it going? Paul, we'll start with you and the 2-0 Minnesota Vikings. Congrats.
Well, yeah, we're feeling pretty good here in Minnesota. This was a team that most people thought would be 0-2, including ourselves. And looks like Sam Darnold might be an actual NFL quarterback here who really was wallowing in bad situations for most of his career and just needed the right landing spot. Pretty impressive. And the Vikings defense might be one that we'll have to start accounting for as well, as we're starting to figure out our weekly starters here.
About to say, man, Brian Flores putting some of these quarterbacks in hell. I believe it was 6 sacks for Brock Purdy yesterday. Great performance by, the Purple People Eaters. Chris, the Bengals, not doing quite as good. But hey, Joe Burrow, he can throw a forward pass. That's a good sign.
And there's no like water bottle conspiracy theories coming out of this game. Really just the conspiracy theories is whether or not the refs are trying to make sure that the Chiefs three-peat after the end of the season. But otherwise, I will take a healthy dose of copium, make sure I get through the rest of the week at least somewhat confident that the Bengals can put together a decent offense. But otherwise, I'm doing all right.
If I'm Burrow, I'm just hiring someone to literally shoot, a water bottle into my mouth for the rest of the season. Not going through with any of that nonsense ever again. So, guys, we're going to break down some problems with the Bears offense. And again, plenty of other goodness in today's show. But first, a quick word on Fantasy Life Plus. Fantasy Life Plus, our premium product over here at Fantasy Life. And again, really, we're just trying to help make you, a scholar, that much better of a fantasy football player. So don't get it twisted, guys. The content, the podcast, even my own consensus ranks, they are all going to still be very much free for you guys. But hey, if you have seen Dwayne McFarland's utilization suite, awfully cool stuff going on there. Plus our start sit tool, some extra waiver fab recommendations, all that and so much more. So not trying to break your bank. Tier 1 package, less than $40 per year, and even Tier 2, less than $10 per month. So Fantasy Life Plus, check it out. Sunday night football, fellas, was an eventful game because, we were waiting all day for Sunday night, obviously, but end of the day, Texans 19, Bears 13, and really time to potentially press the panic button on this Bears offense. Guys, through 2 weeks of action, they are dead last in yards per play. They are dead last in yards per pass attempt, also dead last in explosive pass play rate. So Charge had really high expectations for Caleb Williams and company coming into this year. What level of panic are you at this point?
Medium high. I don't think we're quite at like a bowel loosening level of existential dread quite yet, because at least in the first half, Caleb Williams was making good, quick reads and delivering decisive passes. They were short, but they were decisive passes. And that was a big improvement over how the Bears had looked the entirety of that Titans game in week 1. But then the second half came and the wheels just came off the whole offense, basically. Only 93 passing yards in the entire game. Not connecting on the deep passes for Caleb Williams, but maybe the storyline nobody seems to be talking about. This team can't run. DeAndre Swift has been a disaster through 2 games. 1.3 yards per carry last night, 3 yards per carry last week. He's got the 3rd worst rushing yards over expectation at negative 2.4. He's leaving 2.5 yards on the table every time you give him the ball. How can you do that? One thing I'd like to see them do to try to make maybe a quick fix or just give him some more opportunities. Let's run Caleb Williams a little bit more on some design runs. Let's try to loosen up defenses, make them account for his wheels. He is fast. He can do some things with his legs, but they're really pinning him in as a pocket passer, which I understand that he has to develop there. But let's go try to manufacture some wins, and let's see if we can loosen up some offenses with some Caleb Williams running.
Chris, we've had a lot of Shane Waldron slander going on. The offensive line hasn't been playing great, to put it lightly. I mean, they allowed a 38% pressure rate yesterday. And to Paul's point, DeAndre Swift in the run game, 29th in yards per attempt this season. So, Chris, you're put in charge of the Bears offense for a day. What are you doing to fix it?
Anything and everything other than what's currently being done. Like that's where I'm at right now. Because we had the concerns about Shane Waldron as a play caller when he was still in Seattle, and lo and behold, some of the same schematic inefficiencies of Seattle's offense are kind of popping up here in Chicago. As of right now, like the Bears offense, bottom 10 in pre-snap motion, bottom 10 in play action rate. I mean, these are some of those easy buttons, those levers that you can pull for a quarterback that will allow him to actually get the ball out of his hands and into the hands of his playmakers. And I get it. The personnel that's in front of Caleb Williams, I'm not talking about the pass catchers. I mean, assuming health, we would love to have our quarterback throw into Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Roma Dunze, and like all those other guys. But this offensive line is something of a concern. I think I noted it on one of last week's shows that the interior portion of the Bears offensive line forced pressure into Caleb Williams' lap, like at one of the highest rates in the league. Same thing last night. And while the Texans do have like one of the stronger defensive fronts, if you only have 0.9 seconds from the average time that the center snaps the ball to when the pocket collapses in front of you, I don't know anybody that can operate that quickly. Right. So like if the personnel is already an issue and the scheme is also dependent on everything working well, it's at least a recipe for disaster for Caleb Williams. So I'm with Charch. I'm at a medium to high panic level rate as of right now for the Bears offensive skill players.
We'll say Titans, Texans, two defenses that I don't think we're expecting to be world beaters, but also not exactly terrible. And over the course of these next 5 weeks, the Bears get the Colts, Rams, Panthers, Jaguars, Commanders, and then the Cardinals. So should be easier sledding. But again, based on what we've seen from the offense, tough to exactly assume we're going to have too much of a breakthrough. But please, Caleb, let's just complete a couple more forward passes. Make it look like it's not impossible, man. Some of those, I know what you're saying, Charge, first half wasn't bad, but second half, man, that was a rough viewing experience. Yeah. So that was our Sunday Night Football recap. I want to quickly go through and give you guys a quick update on some of the injuries to be looking out for ahead of week 3. So first of all, obviously we all saw it last Thursday night, but Tua Tagovailoa dealing with the concussion, not expected to consider retirement, but also certainly not expecting to be back on the football field this week, and I would assume the next few after that. Colts quarterback Anthony Richardson, per Dr. Jesse Morris, could have suffered a hamstring injury. I didn't see this elsewhere, so take it with a grain of salt perhaps, but just something to keep an eye on, because obviously Richardson, if we lose some of that mobility, not quite the same fantasy monster. Commanders quarterback Jaden Daniels suffered a rib injury. Chargers quarterback Justin Herbert suffered a leg injury. Both of them came back and played, so I don't think this is going to keep them out, but just keep an eye on the practice reports accordingly. Chiefs running back Isiah Pacheco getting some tests done today. He suffered an ankle injury and was seen leaving the locker room, I believe, in a walking boot and crutches. Certainly not ideal there. Texans running back Joe Mixon did come back and play after a hip drop tackle appeared to sprain his ankle. However, might have just been the adrenaline. He honestly was not out there all that much, even though he did briefly return. So keep an eye there. Texans, I mentioned that already. My apologies. Titans running back Tajay Spears also suffering an ankle injury. Could be a nice boost for Tony Pollard if he is out of the picture. And Rashad White had a groin injury, was able to return, but again, maybe it just was the adrenaline talking. Tank Bigsby with the shoulder, Pierre Strong with the hamstring, Jeff Wilson with an oblique, smaller injuries to keep an eye on. At wide receiver, Justin Jefferson, not too worried about his quad contusion, but as we know, guys, players not always 100% with even their own injury updates right after a game. We'll see what happens ahead of the Vikings Week 3 matchup against the Texans. Cooper Kupp also dealing with a walking boot after he suffered an ankle injury. Rams fans just cannot have nice things. Eagles wide receiver A.J. Brown obviously out tonight for Monday Night Football with that hamstring. Lions wide receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown, I believe, is dealing with an ankle issue. Dan Campbell didn't sound overly concerned, but obviously just something to keep an eye on. And then finally, Jaguars tight end Evan Ingram with the hamstring did not play, and Saints tight end Taysom Hill suffered a chest injury. So keep an eye on all of that. Of course, we'll be back here to update you on the Fantasy Life Show each and every day along the way. So that was the news, and now a quick word from our friends over at Experian. Guys, Experian is to your finances what Fantasy Life is to your fantasy league. It is a tool and resource designed to make your life easier, because the Experian app is free to download and serves as a one-stop shop for managing your financial health. With so many spending and subscription details to track, let Experian handle it for you. They'll help you find and cancel your unwanted or forgotten subscriptions, helping you save money and focus on what really matters. That's right, winning your fantasy league. Download the Experian app today. Just note results will vary. Not all subs are eligible. Savings not guaranteed. Paid membership with connected payment account required, and see Experian.com for details. All right, fellas, week 2 is pretty much in the book, so it's time to overreact. And what better team to overreact with than the New Orleans Saints, coming off that absolute massacre of the Dallas Cowboys in Jerry World. Paul, this offense is looking pretty freaking good, and I do think new OC Clint Kubiak deserves a lot of credit for that. How convinced are you that we are looking at actually an elite offense led by Derek Carr?
Oh, man, I did not see this coming. I think we were all prepared for the correction after week one. And yeah, I'm happy to give Clint Kubiak credit for unleashing an incredibly dynamic, balanced attack that is dialing up big plays that I did not expect. The Saints offensive line was expected to be one of the league's worst, and it was particularly about Ryan Ramczyk all season. Instead, the line play has been great. They rank 6th in run blocking, 1st in pass blocking by Pro Football Focus. Another indicator of how good this line is playing, Alvin Kamara is 3rd in yards before contact at almost 3 yards. I mean, what a luxury to gain 3 yards before you have to deal with your first defender. This offensive line has come together really, really well. And for Kamara, whose running metrics had really been going down the past several years, man, he looks reborn, running hard, including between the tackles, something he had struggled with significantly. Right now through these 2 games, Alvin Kamara's A-gap success rate is 67%. That's a big improvement from last year. And I'll give you one quick side note on the Kubiaks, plural. You remember Gary? Longtime head coach, right? Texans, Broncos, longtime offensive coordinator, Minnesota, many others, Super Bowl winner. You know what he's doing right now? He's a coaching consultant in the Polish Football League and has been for 3 years. Why?
Why not?
You made NFL coin for 30 years and you won a Super Bowl and now you're a coaching consultant. You're not even a head coach in the Polish Football League. Gary Kubiak, what's going on?
Thanks for that update, Paul. I know we're all dying to know where Gary was spending his time.
Where do you even get that job? You go to Indeed.com or something like that? Where do you get a job like that?
the Polish
Chris,
version
again,
of Indeed.
Can't say enough good things about what, Clint Kubiak is doing right now in the NFL. EPA per play first by a landslide, yards per play first. And Chris, I know something you mentioned before is, the lack of easy buttons being pushed in Chicago. Not really a problem in New Orleans right now.
Yeah, the absolute opposite for Clint Kubiak. And these are the things that you would want to see a play caller, a schemer want to do for your quarterback. And now this is almost like the night and day operation to going from Pete Carmichael to Clint Kubiak, where they were in the same situation that the Bears find themselves now, like bottom 10, bottom 5 in play action rate, RPO rate, use of screens, pre-snap motion. I mean, all of those things where it's like, all right, we know we have concerns about either the offensive line or the guy throwing our pass catchers the ball. So let's make it easier for him. Let's make sure that we get the ball out of his hands quickly or put him in as many advantageous situations as possible in order to make sure we're getting the most out of this passing game as a whole. And lo and behold, when we do that, great things happen. We see these bombs to Rashid Shaheed every week, at least for the past couple of weeks so far. We see Chris Olave getting involved in the passing game downfield. We see whether it's Jawan Johnson, whether it's Taysom Hill, although prayers up for Taysom Hill after his injury, scary yesterday and having to go to the hospital. But all the things that are part of the Saints passing game are clicking, and it has to come from Derek Carr, at least from a passing standpoint. But again, credit to Clint Kubiak in terms of making sure that he's putting the quarterback in the right situation in order to succeed. And that's the way that we want that for all of our passers. But yeah, Clint Kubiak, hats off to him. If he can win Coach of the Year, I mean, he should definitely get that award.
The Saints have turned 52.4% of their drives into touchdowns this year. Second place team, the Arizona Cardinals, all the way down there at 39%. So truly cooking right now. And we'll see how hot they can stay against the Eagles and the Falcons. But man, certainly passed their first tough test with flying colors there against the Cowboys. All right, guys, now let's talk about the Green Bay Packers and how the loveless Packers offense has really been running through Josh Jacobs. Paul, in week 1, we saw the Packers have a 65% pass play rate. That was 10th. In week 2, 26.9% pass play rate. That was certainly dead at last in the NFL. So obviously the game script, played a large role in that. But then again, man, they get the Titans next week, and that does seem like potentially another team where they could, control the clock and do what they want to do on offense. So how excited are you for the Josh Jacobs experience, which, man, I believe he already had over 120 yards in the first half alone yesterday.
Yeah, 32 carries. Unbelievable. He ran hard. He looked good. Offensive line played really well, gave him a lot of room to work with. Incredibly, and I'm going to editorialize for a minute here. Okay, you're the Colts, you're Shane Steichen, your defensive coordinator, Gus Bradley. The opposing quarterback is a really limited passer, especially downfield. For some reason, Josh Jacobs saw 18% of his plays with 8 men in the box. Come on, Colts. What are you doing here? You know you got to play at the line of scrimmage to stop Malik Willis, because Willis is going to run and he's going to throw short. And if you've got men in the box, you're going to stop both of those things. They didn't do it. Willis ended up with 2 passes of more than 15 yards in this game. 2. That's it. And they were running a very vanilla defense. So I think Gus Bradley handed this win to the Packers. I'm not taking anything away, by the way, from Josh Jacobs, who did look good. And, they brought him in to be a workhorse, and Lord knows he was. But Colts never adapted. And, now look what happened. Colts run defense, by the way, we should mention. They've now given up 213 yards and 261 rushing yards. Run defense. Up next, DeAndre Swift. We just talked about how he's got to get better. Maybe it comes up here.
Movable force meets a stoppable object there in that matchup. Cannot wait. Chris, speaking of that, Packers offensive line, Chargers, Saints, Packers, and Ravens, the only offenses right now averaging north of 2 yards before contact per carry. And again, that they're doing good, but also Josh Jacobs really looking like the man that we saw before 2023. NFL high 181 yards after contact right now. I mean, that's more than all but 6 other running backs having pure rushing yards, period, before or after contact, everything combined, obviously. So where do you think, Chris, Josh Jacobs would be kind of going in fantasy drafts if we had to reset and do everything again? Because as Paul said, man, 32 carries out here. It's tough to complain about that.
Right. And I think that if we were redrafting right now, I would maybe push him a round or 2 ahead of where he was drafted at. Where is he at? The 5th-ish round, somewhere in there. I mean, it makes sense to kind of push him forward. Yeah. So it's from an opportunity standpoint, we would want to see some of the ball carriers that were going ahead of him, maybe slide them back and move him up in the, maybe as Isiah Pacheco-ish type of range. If I could think of a name to kind of comp him to, but I don't know if we can make the same season-long bet as we were with some of the younger running backs that were being drafted ahead of him, because we do know that at least from an injury standpoint that is a potential for Josh Jacobs at this point in his career. He already did have the hamstring scare in the offseason, so whether or not this is going to hold up throughout the entirety of the season, I guess that's TBD. But man, if the Packers are going to lean on him this much, and on top of that, anybody behind Josh Jacobs is not really much of an issue. Marshawn Lloyd makes his debut last week, and then he winds up leaving with either an ankle injury or a hamstring injury. If I'm not, I can't remember which one for sure. But if there's not going to be anybody on the depth chart that's going to try and dethrone Josh Jacobs from the RB1 role, for right now, I have to assume that Jacobs is going to continue to be the guy, and especially on an offense that is going to be predicated on the run. Negative 31.1% pass rate over expectation. I'll go ahead and let y'all guess whether or not that's the lowest in the entire league for week 2. But if this is going to be a run-first type of offense and Josh Jacobs is going to be leading it, I want a piece of it.
Ian Rapoport reported that Jordan Love is hoping to make his return in week 5 against the Rams defense, which, I would probably want to be out there in return for that matchup as well. Yeah. So again, they'll get the Titans and Vikings. In the meantime, Josh Jacobs keep him in fantasy lineups of all shapes and sizes. Guys, turns out Marvin Harrison Jr. is not slow, and he is still very good at football. 4 catches, 130 yards, and 2 touchdowns in the first quarter yesterday. Did not catch another ball the rest of the afternoon, but clearly some of that week 1 overreacting was, going on a bit too soon. Week 1 victory laps, guys. Hell of a drug here in Fantasyland. So, Charch, when you look at Marvin Harrison Jr., I know as our resident Guillotine League expert, rookies are players that we want to be careful with because it does take them some time to ramp up. But in Marv's case, it seems like it only took him 60 minutes to get going. How do you look at him now in week 3 and beyond in terms of being a potential wide receiver 1 in Fantasyland?
Yeah, Marvin Harrison, who went at the end of the first round, beginning of the second round. At the time, that seemed a little bit, controversial, But really, now when we look at it, he's in the conversation for one of the best picks in that spot, and the conversation's pretty short. It's like Saquon Barkley is the conversation. It's that short. How short is this conversation? It's like when Chris wants to tell me all about his model train recreation in his basement. Last time I had to fake a stroke to get out of that conversation.
Look, I thought you were interested.
That's how short this is. Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating breaking down all the gauges. I had no idea there were 3 accepted model train gauges for tracks. Chris, it's really.
I'm so hurt right
now. Others at the 1-2 turn have been just okay, like Jonathan Taylor, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Travis Etienne. What I loved about Harrison's week 2 was his downfield domination. Touchdowns of 33 and 35 yards, his ADOT. 18.5 yards, only one target under 5 yards for Marvin Harrison, only 3 targets under 10 yards, 8 targets of at least 13 yards downfield. This is the deployment of Marv that we were here for. This is what he was so good at Ohio State. This is what powers fantasy teams. You know, having your receiver catch 5-yard passes and bubble screens just doesn't add up to enough fantasy points. We want downfield lethal assassins, and it's a small sample size, one bad game, one amazing game, but that's what we're here for, and it was great to see Marvin Harrison get deployed that way.
Chris, I agree with Charch in terms of Saquon Barkley really being the only competition at this point when you look at that round 1, round 2 turn, because AJB and Puka banged up. Garrett Wilson hasn't scored yet. Not saying he's going to fall off, but just hasn't gotten too much going right now. Henry, Gibbs, Kyron, Drake London, Jonathan Taylor, these guys just haven't put up the big games to this point. So Lions and Commanders over these next 2 weeks for Marv. Maybe we'll get a couple more booms. So you can talk more about Marv or defend your train set, Chris. You know, the floor is yours.
I feel like I have to defend my model train set. Like, although I feel like that's what I have to do for that. But no, let's talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. That's more actionable for people watching the show. Wasn't a major schematic shift like for Marvin, at least from the way that he was deployed. I mean, he was still seeing about like a 15-16% like slot snap rate. So it wasn't like they were trying to like let's move him onto the inside. Let's get him these like short dump offs or slant routes or something like that in order to get the ball in his hands and have him like working after the catch. Like, no, he was still operating out wide on the majority of his snaps, still looking downfield, still working the intermediate parts of the field. It's funny though, if you go back and like go to Next Gen Stats and look at Greg Dortch's like route participation, his route tree like from week 1, and then go look at like Marvin Harrison's like from week 2. I wouldn't say like they're exactly the same, but where he was being targeted at, where Dortch was being looked at, like on the outside of the field, like outside of the like towards the sideline on the numbers. Like that's where Marvin Harrison was kind of cooking this week. So it's like, all right, so if he's more in sync with what Kyler Murray likes to do, and then on top of that, Drew Petzing is now putting him in those types of situations where it's like, okay, this is how Kyler likes to work. This is what he likes to do. And now I'm going to put Marvin Harrison in the same spot. Oh, well, look at that. Like now things are starting to click. So I could see a situation, or at least from a qualitative standpoint, where Dortch already knows those things. Dortch already has been a part, he's familiar with them. And of course, with our short king summer, like we wanting to see like him succeed, that makes sense for us. But now if Marv actually is now getting on the same page as him, also being used a bit more on play action targets, this is the type of thing that we would expect to see from Marvin Harrison moving forward. So again, I'm not expecting this massive shift, not expecting his ADOT to drop or anything like that. We would like it to be around like 10, 11, 12 yards or something like that. That's more akin to like an elite like wide receiver 1 to indicate a more diverse route tree. But if Kyler's still going to be looking for him 15 yards down the field and they're connecting, I'll take that all day long.
Cardinals offense right now, 34.5 points per game. That is second in the NFL. Really fun time to be, a Kyler Murray, a Marvin Harrison Jr. fantasy manager, James Conner, even Trey McBride, guys, falling on footballs in the end zone. Great day to be great over there with the Cardinals. Speaking of potential league winners, J.K. Dobbins, that's right, the NFL's RB1 right now in total rushing yards. Keeping on. Back-to-back games with 130 or more rushing yards. First Chargers running back to do that since LaDainian Tomlinson. So Charch, man, apparently Achilles injuries don't matter because J.K. Dobbins looks absolutely great out there. Are you buying this early season ascension, or maybe are we getting a little too excited about a 2-game sample size?
Oh, it looks real. He's got more rushing yards than anybody by a 19-yard margin. And get this, he has 3 of the 6 longest runs on the season are all J.K. Dobbins, a 43, a 46, and a 61-yard run. Dang. Those 3 runs alone would rank him 9th in rushing in the NFL. His A-gap success rate is 90%. J.K. Dobbins ranks 3rd in the avoided tackle rate of 33%. And what's more, Gus Edwards continues to look like a non-factor. He is now sitting at a rushing yards over expectation of negative 1.2, and he is dead last in avoided tackle rate at 0 so far. Edwards does not look like he's going to be a threat at all. And as a side note here, preemptive pickup, Kamani Vidal, because if Gus Edwards is going to keep going like this, he's going to find himself out of this rotation, and they may end up going to Vidal at some point here before too long. So I'd be giving a little speculative pickup to Kamani Vidal this week. Let's see if this thing pans out in the next week or two.
It has been tough sledding for the artist known as Gus Bus. Chris, we have seen some, pretty positive game scripts. I don't think we're expecting the Chargers to necessarily be leading by double digits that often this season, but so far so good. They get the Steelers and the Chiefs over these next 2 weeks. So where do you see Dobbins falling in terms of the ranks? Because again, as much as he has played like a legit RB1, Gus the Bus Edwards still is pretty much matching him in terms of the carries, not seeing a ton of pass game involvement. More of a mid-tier RB2 for you, Chris, or are we just trusting it and saying get the man in the top 10?
I think I'm more in line with Charch about like where we should be like valuing him, because I would expect to see more of the carries and snaps like start to trend more and hit like more in Dobbins' way. Now, unless there is still some concern like from the coaching staff as to do they really want to let him loose? Do they really want to open him up and see how much more of a workload he can take? And that would then lend itself a bit more to Gus Edwards being a larger part, or at least like somewhat of a part of that. Like whether they shift it to Gus or maybe they start involving Kamani Vidal or whatever the case may be. Like instead of overloading him early, let's see what he can take and slowly ramp him up throughout the season. But either way, I'm 100% with Charch on the idea that like Dobbins is here to stay. I mean, from a rushing success rate standpoint, 50% last week, over 60% this week. And also, I think the only thing that Gus provides, or I would say for fantasy managers, he is still getting those touches inside the red zone, which we kind of like. Now, if those start to go more towards Dobbins' way, and my hope that would be the case over the coming weeks, then we're really talking about like a low-end RB1, high-end RB2 in that sense. So I'm with you, like for right now, mid-tier RB1. But after this week, if we see more stuff going his way, more of the goal line, or like not even goal line, red zone opportunities shift his way, I mean, we got to start pumping him up the ranks a bit.
Either way, guys, such a great story to start the season out there. And, sorry, I guess, Ravens fans. I saw one of them tweeting how Dobbins was having trouble walking up the stairs in Baltimore, and now he's front flipping into the end zone in Los Angeles. So really great stuff from Dobbins. Hopefully he keeps on keeping on. Guys, another new player in a new city, Brock Bowers, taking the league by storm, currently number 1 among all tight ends in receptions and receiving yards after 2 weeks of action. So, Charch, were the QB concerns in Las Vegas completely overblown? Because right now, Bowers and Devontae Adams looking pretty good for fantasy managers out there.
Minshew's look good, and he did it against a Ravens pass defense that is really good, probably one of the 5 best in the league. So you gotta feel great about Brock Bowers in particular, who I think just looked fantastic, totally passes the eye test, creates a ton of cushion, then moves fluidly with the ball after the catch. And for a big man, and he is big, Brock Bowers unusually slippery. More slippery than that Malik Willis barf ball we got last week, which is something I had never seen before. I mean, we've all watched a lot of football. I've never seen that happen. How about this for Bowers? He's caught 15 of 17 passes through 2 games. He's piled up almost 60 yards after the catch. The only issue with Bowers so far is depth of target. He's only been thrown 2 passes longer than 11 yards so far. But look, it's a second NFL game, right? They're going to start stretching out his responsibilities farther downfield as he acclimates to the NFL, and they'll start unleashing him downfield. And at that point, look, Bowers, there's a pathway here. Given what tight ends are doing this year, there's a pathway for Brock Bowers to end up as tight end 1 this season based on what we've seen and the early utilization that he's gotten.
Certainly looking like this year's version of Sam Laporta. I mean, no, he wasn't as cheap as Laporta was in drafts or anything like that, but man, the production speaks for itself at this point. So, and regarding the low ADOT, I wouldn't be that worried about it, because guess what? We almost have this kind of confusion in our minds where we always think upside needs to be these more downfield targets. But hey, especially if you're in a full PPR league, man, we want 10 catches for 100 yards, not, 1 catch for 100 yards. That'd be kind of cool. Don't get me wrong. But again, with Bowers, like that's a similar role as David Njoku and Evan Ingram had last year, really making the most out of his opportunities. So, Chris, I mean, how real is this Gardner Minshew experience, though? Because we've seen him have some good run, but I mean, I know the one stat I kept leaning on that I thought was pretty provocative during the offseason was last year, Gardner Minshew 31st in completion rate over expected, Aiden O'Connell 32nd. But I look up this year, and after 2 weeks, Minshew is second at plus 8.9%. So, Chris, it was one of those things where after week 1, I kind of was like, okay, we had a good week. But to Chargers' point, you do it against the Ravens, man, it feels pretty real.
Yeah, and the thing is that it's not even like they're making they're putting more constraints on him. They're making this passing offense more conservative. I think when we were coming into this season, it was going to be more of, well, let's let Zamir White or like the running game like really take control, and then we'll sprinkle in some Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell, whomever between the two was going to win, and they're going to be the ones to kind of take a backseat to the offense, be more of a game manager type of thing. But that really hasn't been the case. Last week they were top 4, top 5 in pass rate over expectation. I mean, they're out there dealing. So now for Brock Bowers, if we're not getting not just the opportunity, I mean, what is it, 20+% target share like last week, that was top 5 amongst all tight ends. Air yard share also top 5 amongst tight ends, and we're getting the volume. I mean, heck, I would assume that this is going to be Brock Bowers. Like, he should be the guy that, like, for folks that were drafting him, they should be very happy with where he's at right now, and this should continue to occur throughout the rest of the season.
Guys, we have some live news I think we should briefly discuss, as much as I do love Brock Bowers. But we did get a report from Ian Hartitz saying that Isiah Pacheco fractured his fibula based on initial tests. So more information coming to determine the severity and associated damage. But Pacheco is, quote unquote, set to miss real time. So
yeah,
that sucks. Number one.
That does.
Number two, because we're fantasy football weirdos, we didn't discuss the implications and who starts getting more touches. Clyde Edwards-Helaire currently on IR, so that leaves, we're going to have Samaje Perine potentially stepping up. We have Carson Steele, a.k.a. Kareem, Hunt going on. Paul, initial reaction and who you would think that fantasy manager should be spending some of that fab on now.
Yeah, really unfortunate situation. And first of all, hoping for a quick recovery for Isiah Pacheco. Dude runs so hard, such a great player. It's a real loss. And nobody's going to walk into the productivity that he had. Really special player. Samaje Perine would be my priority here because he is a pass catching back. And you notice they had really done an uptick on the receptions that Isiah Pacheco had. And I want to walk into those catches as well. And so I would prioritize him. Veteran, he is a reasonably good pass blocker, and he can catch. Steele's, obviously a big guy, and I wouldn't be surprised if Steele ends up turning into the goal line back for this team at some point. In terms of a waiver situation, Pacheco's going to be expensive. I mean, this is, not Pacheco, with Pacheco out, probably both guys will be expensive, but I think Perine's going to be priority here, like 20%. 25%, because you're getting the probable starting running back for the Chiefs. Steele mixes in at maybe 10% for me. I mean, that's first blush. Maybe you guys feel like I'm being aggressive here, but I'm interested in the Chiefs starting running back on my fantasy team has found money.
I mean, it really is a, rare potential situation we get here, Chris. And hey, let's face it, guys like Damian Williams in past years have gone on, taken a full-time role and made a lot of it. It's not like we've needed elite talent to get, elite production in Kansas City. So initial thoughts here on your end, Chris.
Yeah, I agree with Charch that if you were going to be spending some fab out there, taking some shots on Samaje Perine if he happens to be still sitting out there on the waiver wire, and being somewhat aggressive on it, because there's not too many other free agents that I can see them going out and trying to get a handle on, like at least for the short term. So Carson Steele, I think, would be the backup. He was getting some work yesterday, when we did have something of an issue with Pacheco. I think he came out briefly during the game anyway. But Carson Steele's still getting some work already. Did fumble throughout the game, so we have to wonder what his workload and snap rate is going to be moving forward. But if we already know that Perine is going to be, or the assumption is that he'll not only be the pass catching back, early down grinder, but also the guy that's going to be out there in 2-minute obvious passing situations like he has been in years past when he was with the Bengals and so on and so forth. I do see that as being a reason for most fantasy managers to get aggressive from a fab standpoint for waivers this week.
Chiefs got the Falcons and Chargers over these next 2 weeks. So if you think Andy Reid needed any more excuse to really throw the ball to his heart's desire, I think he just got it. So prayers up for Isiah Pacheco. Again, not every fracture is created equal. Hopefully this is on the lower end of bones breaking. He can get back out there before too long. Guys, last week 1 overreaction we really want to get to. Week 2 overreaction, excuse me. I'm flustered over here. Malik Nabers looking like a wide receiver 1 in New York. That's what he's been there in the first 2 weeks. Guys, a 20.15 PPR points per game. That is wide receiver 4 status behind only Chris Godwin, A.J. Brown, and Nico Collins. So, Church, unfortunately, we don't get to see, Nabers go up against the Washington Commanders secondary each and every week. But so far, so good for the 6th overall pick.
Yeah, currently holds these wide receiver ranks for Malik Nabers. He's second in targets, second in receptions, third in receiving yards, and tied for fifth in yards after the catch. And in one of those games, Daniel Jones looked horrible, and the other one, he looked average. So, and by the way, give Daniel Jones some credit for bouncing back nicely after getting pilloried by the Vikings and the New York media all week after week one. Came back. Now, granted, it's the Commanders, and, that puts a big asterisk on everything, and I totally get that. But here coming up games for Nabers and Daniel Jones, Cleveland and Dallas. So, now we'll get a better read on where Daniel Jones really is, but really optimistic just because the dominating levels of usage for the two-start rookie, Malik Nabers. To some degree, you're almost, not entirely, but if you're going to get the ball this much and be this well utilized, to some degree, the defense doesn't even necessarily matter. You're going to get enough safety that floor feels intact. And one just quick aside, Devin Singletary, well, talking Giants, currently number one in avoided tackle rate among all runners. If you haven't really seen him, he has been terrific for the Giants, and his storyline getting lost a little bit. So I just want to throw that into our Nabers discussion.
Yeah, I believe last week it was Singletary and Jacobs, so time for the league high, week high with 10 missed tackles for us on the ground. So good note there, Charge. Got a couple guys, for the New York Football Giants making some plays out there. But Chris, level of confidence in Nabers, because again, right now he's producing as a wide receiver 1. Last night on our recap pod, I think Dwayne asked me where I would be shocked if he finished below this year, and I said wide receiver 20. So again, if he doesn't finish as that, I would really be surprised, because as much as the Daniel Jones experience has, the potential to go down. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I got a little scared when Paul mentioned the Browns and Cowboys are the next two opponents. Man, volume can be still something that helps outweigh that in fantasy land.
I don't understand why you guys are so concerned about Daniel Jones as of right now. The man grew a beard. I mean, he's looking great. He's got a little bit of drip on him. I mean, what? I don't understand what the big deal is. I mean, at least he looks better. I mean, I would say that if you look better, that adds some confidence. He should play better. Clearly, that happened last week. So, all right. So, being serious. 2/3 of the targets yesterday, 75% of the team's air yards. I mean, my goodness. Now, I get it. Darius Slayton came into the week, went through concussion protocol, still able to play. We do know that Wan'Dale is a serviceable, wide receiver 2B or whatever. But, if this is the way that he's going to dominate the targets. Now, I get it. They're coming from Daniel Jones. But on a week in, week out basis, if the opportunity is going to be there, yeah, Ian, I do believe that wide receiver 20, from a season long standpoint, that should at least be the bar we should set. But I'd say with the way that Nabers is playing right now, he'll easily clear it.
I know everyone who was able to get Nabers really late in ESPN drafts feeling good about that right about now. Certainly someone we highlighted plenty. And now that I'm, kind of patting ourselves on the back, I'm sure everything will go to shit because that's how fantasy football works. So a few more overreactions we want to get to, guys. But first, a quick word to our friends over at DraftKings. Hey everyone, with the football season kicking off, it is the perfect time to dive into the action with our partners at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet on touchdowns. And right now, all new customers who bet $5 will instantly get $250 in bonus bets and 1 month of NFL Plus Premium on us. That is something we can all celebrate. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app today and sign up using our promo code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. And stay in on the action and use your $250 in bonus bets to bet anytime touchdowns on DraftKings. After all, DraftKings is the place to bet touchdowns. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use our promo code FANTASYLIFE and bet just $5 on any wager to get $250 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code FANTASYLIFE only at DraftKings Sportsbook. All right, guys, we were overreacting, and now let's talk about a potential reason for everyone to panic, and we mean everyone, because if you had a first-round pick in fantasy this year, which we all did, there's a decent chance that you are again at panic station, whether it's CMC on IR, Tyreek Hill catching passes from Skylar Thompson. I mean, Chris, it's 1 through 12, man. Something bad has happened to nearly every single player, with the lone exception right now being Breece Hall. But even then, if you want to bicker about Braylon Allen stealing 2 of his touchdowns, this is a safe space after all. So, Chris, first round, you buying the fantasy curse?
No, not yet. It's 2 weeks, and I get it. We only have, maybe 13-ish weeks in the season before we get into the playoffs or something like that. And probably the first half of those 13 weeks. So by week 6, week 7, we have an understanding of what are the playoff teams and what aren't. So we want to start as hot as possible, and I completely understand that. But let's give it a little bit of time. At least for a couple of the guys that were drafted in the first round, we at least did get to see some sort of bounce back. Like Amon-Ra St. Brown, like despite the potential like leg contusion or whatever that kept him out for a brief part of yesterday's game against the Bucs, I mean, he did wind up at least ascending to the target share we were expecting him to get to, like with Jameson Williams being a part of the passing game, him ascending to that role, Sam Laporta, so on and so forth. So at least like we're seeing some of those guys bounce back. The hope is that we'll see like other guys like start to get there as well. Like Jamar Chase will get to where he's supposed to be at. AJ Brown, like despite the injury, at least in week one, at least the initial results like were positive. Some of those other guys, I do have some hope for given their underlying metrics, but for a couple of them, yeah, I definitely get I get the concern, but let's give it one more week and see where we're at.
Charch, I was told that running backs are the ones that get injured, and that's why we should focus on wide receivers early in drafts. But lo and behold, here we are in week 2, and guys like Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua, A.J. Brown, all dealing with injuries of varying, extents out here. So, look, I'm not saying that they're not going to be back soon and putting up big numbers, but, man, frustrating start for some people that I know were really hoping this was going to be the year for, the zero and hero RB builds. And, yeah, I'm looking at myself a little bit here, Charch. So can you help me feel better?
Well, yeah, I think Chris hit on a lot of salient points. Most of these guys are going to reverse early season struggles. Lamb and Chase and Amon-Ra St. Brown's probably going to be fine. And, Garrett Wilson's just too good to fail, in my opinion. I think these guys are going to ultimately be okay. What's kind of nice here, and it's a little bit like the tight end position, is that we're all struggling together. And, we're all getting nothing out of our tight ends. We're all getting nothing out of our first-round picks. So I feel like you're not losing games just because of that differential between the guy you picked in the first round and the guy somebody else picked in the first round, because we're all kind of in the same boat to some degree, other than the Christian McCaffrey owner. Who's, obviously, those managers have really found themselves in a tight squeeze here. But, most of us in kind of the same boat. So I don't feel like I'm losing games because of my first-round pick.
People like to say fantasy football drives, differences in people, but I think Charch just outlined how it's actually bringing us together and making us feel that much better.
Kumbaya.
So, yeah, guys, kumbaya indeed. So we can all take solace in the fact our first round picks suck. Gotta love the great game of fantasy football.
Yes.
So, guys, let's go ahead and, get a little bit more negative. That's right. It's time to get on the chopping block. Let's do it. If you guys aren't in some guillotine leagues, shame on you, first of all, because obviously with Paul Charchian, the godfather of guillotine leagues here, we have certainly taken a huge interest in it over at FantasyLife. But honestly, Paul, I'm not just saying this. I thought it was cool signing up for my first couple this year, but it really took until last week once I got on the waiver wire and I was like, oh, wait, I can bid for Lamar Jackson right now. This is actually awesome, because that's how it works. One team per week. See you later. We're chopping your head off, theoretically, of course, in most leagues. And then obviously we get to go ahead and pick at their carcass and go ahead and get those players. So on the chopping block, again, every week we're going to highlight 3 players who should be out there suddenly on the waivers in more guillotine leagues than not. And what better one to start with, Paul, than a lot of people's wide receiver 1 going to the season, Tyreek Hill, 36 scoreless yards on just 4 touches last week. And now we're looking at least a short stretch of Skylar Thompson being under center. What are you looking at for Tyreek right now, and how much would you recommend potentially using FabWise to attain his services on the waiver wire?
Yeah, in a lot of leagues, Tyreek Hill is going to get chopped, and you'll have a chance to add him to your roster. And I'll note that there's detailed Guillotine League bidding advice that comes to FantasyLife every Tuesday in 2 forms. We got a long article that talks about what's happening, different rounds, who you should bid on, how much you should bid. And then we have the Chop podcast, myself and Brian Johnson, breaking down all things specifically to Guillotine Leagues. That comes out every Tuesday afternoon as well. Back to Tyreek Hill. Comes off that disappointing game that you mentioned, just 5.4 PPR points. That was lower than any game last year for Tyreek Hill. He had been as safe as really anybody in fantasy football up until last week. And obviously complicating matters is Tua Tagovailoa's situation. But here's the thing. I am the rare Skylar Thompson believer that thinks, at least by the standards of a backup, he's not half bad. He's got that big arm, which is critical to the downfield plays that we associate with Tyreek Hill. He's going to scatter the ball wildly, but that's okay. Those don't hurt us as much as the big plays help us. Tua's absence, though, adds risk for the dud game to Tyreek Hill that we haven't had to consider before. Mike McDaniel's going to run more. He likes to run anyway. If Tua were healthy and Tyreek Hill were hitting the waiver wire, we'd be talking about bid amounts at like $200, $250. Without Tua, I think it's half that. I think we're like $100, maybe 10% of your fab to go get Tyreek Hill. We have no idea what Tua's return is. If if your finger in the wind says it's going to be sooner than later, and we hope it is, then maybe you bump up that 100 to 125, maybe even 150. But based on what we know right now, I'm going like $100 on Tyreek Hill. I'm not going to break the bank on a guy who might not have his quarterback for 2 months.
Another player widely considered to be at the top of his position, yet not exactly playing like that so far. It's Lions tight end Sam Laporta. I mean, Charge, through 2 weeks, we have Amon-Ra St. Brown with 25 targets, Jameson Williams with 20, Jahmyr Gibbs with 13, and 4th place on his own team, Sam Laporta with a lowly 8. So I would like to think that's going to turn around to some extent, but clearly Jameson Williams is here to stay as a key contributor in this offense. So what do you make of Sam Laporta on the chopping block? Because I know one of the first things you told me about Guillotine leagues is how important it is to have an elite tight end.
Yeah, because you didn't want to go to war with Cole Kmet and, of his ilk. And so now that said, most of the tight ends are not giving us very much, but we're all suffering together. Now, at this time last week, we were in a mild level of panic over Amon-Ra St. Brown, who got very little activity in week 1. And then he went out at 19 targets yesterday. So now we're looking at Sam Laporta, who's still a very good tight end. He ranks number 1 among all tight ends in routes run. And it's frankly not close. He's got 13 more routes than the next closest tight end. So, he is still highly involved in this offense. It's just the target rate is weirdly low. His target rate is 6%, which that's a total aberration. We're going to regress to the mean. The target rate's going to go up here. And with Amon-Ra perhaps laboring or maybe even missing this next game, the ball's just got to come Laporta's way here. Last week, Laporta had an average winning bid in Guillotine leagues of $233 for those leagues in which he was available. Now, $233 is too high, and nobody should be bidding that much for anybody who's not absolutely elite. That's like Justin Jefferson level money, but we'll still come in with Laporta at like $100. He's going to be very big. He's going to help a lot of people. You can play tight end bully if you want to. I am absolutely convinced Laporta is going to come back here.
Some of these numbers Charge is throwing around is making me realize that my $275 bid for Lamar Jackson last week might have been a little bit ill-advised, but you know what? I got Lamar Jackson on the squad now, so you tell me if that was that bad of an idea. Charge, final note here, Christian McCaffrey obviously on IR, and there's a chance he's going to miss up to 6 weeks of action. So, talk about McCaffrey, but also in general, how to approach, players on IR, because unlike in a lot of normal redraft leagues, we don't have the luxury in more Guillotine leagues than not of simply stashing the guy outside, on the IR spot. They got to take up a valuable spot on our bench.
Yeah, and you hit on a key element to this. In Guillotine leagues, our focus is on just staying alive for like the next 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. That's your vision window. Nothing else matters. So there is the concept of like stashing a guy for 6-7 weeks down the road should not even be entering your mind in a Guillotine league. We don't care about any of that. Christian McCaffrey's timetable looks like it's closer to Halloween. Do not factor into your bidding some murky future where he might come back in November. In all probability, Christian McCaffrey is going to get cut 2 or 3 more times before he comes back. This is not even close to your last time to bid on Christian McCaffrey because he's going to provide 0 points for whoever wins the bid for him for this week. So I'm bidding $50 on Christian McCaffrey. I'm not going to get him, and that's fine. Somebody else can go get him, and I'll save that money, and I'll look at adding Christian McCaffrey closer to Halloween.
And Chris, it could be a situation where we don't get the same Christian McCaffrey that we're used to seeing come back, both from his own health and also from the reality that Jordan Mason looks really good out there. I mean, why would the 49ers go ahead and hand CMC this 90% snap rate role when you have Mason going out there and making the most out of his opportunities right now?
I think my initial reaction when CMC got put on IR was, okay, well, Jordan Mason, obvious league winner now with the amount of time he's going to spend as the 49ers like RB1. My thought process, though, is like when he comes back, could CMC recoup some value as a receiver? because we do know that the dual threat ability of Christian McCaffrey has been the reason he's been like the RB1 for the past like 2-3 years. So I haven't seen that yet from Jordan Mason. He is out there getting his routes in, like is being used like somewhat as a pass catcher, but he's really not up to that 13, 14, 15% target share that we saw from Christian McCaffrey. So when we see that happen for Jordan Mason, then I'll be officially worried about Christian McCaffrey as a potential fantasy asset for the remainder of the season. But 100% I'm with you on the idea that, yeah, even when he does come back, we should expect to see a split between Jordan Mason and Christian McCaffrey, because why should the 49ers risk another injury for him? Why should the 49ers put one of their prime players, offensive skill players, like in that type of position in the regular season? Save them for the playoffs if they can.
Never a dull week in Guillotine Land, which I'm quickly learning really is a fun time. Hey, and I could be singing a different tune depending on what happens next week. But again, that is why we love it. So make sure you guys check out Paul's aforementioned article and podcast, always at FantasyLife.com, your one-stop shop for all things Guillotine Leagues. Now, fellas, it's time for everyone's favorite Monday game, Keep, Trade, Cut. All right, guys, we got gross last week, but it was nowhere even close to what we're about to do right now. And I'm going to put you on the spot, Chris. Keep, trade, cut. Jaguars alleged wide receiver 1 Christian Kirk. Panthers alleged wide receiver 1 Deontay Johnson. And Raiders RB2, RB3. Nah, he's a starter. But Zamir White, go, Chris. Keep, trade, cut.
Y'all can keep it. I'm trading myself out of the situation. That's how this works, right? All right. So, okay. All right.
You're the trade. Yes.
I'm being traded out of this. Okay. So if I'm thinking about this right, going through and saying that Zamir White, I will go and keep Zamir for this upcoming week. The matchup actually looks like fairly decent, like for the Raiders. So if I'm gonna at least get some of that workload back, I'll go with it. After that, Christian Kirk, no, I don't want to be involved in that. Deontay Johnson, I'll go ahead and cut Deontay Johnson. Let's go ahead and trade Christian Kirk under the chances that he potentially gets back to that type of target share for the Jaguars that we would expect like so far. Let's see if the Jaguars passing game gets back on track. I would at least trade away Kirk under that type of premise. But then after that, Deontay Johnson, I want nothing to do with the Panthers offense.
Chris mentioned the matchup, getting the Panthers to here in week 3 for the Raiders, the 3rd worst defense right now in yards before contact per carry. So if Zamir can't boom this week, I don't know if it's ever going to happen. But where do you fall on these wide receivers between Christian Kirk and Deontay Johnson?
Yeah, I'm with Chris on everything. Cutting Deontay Johnson because I can't put my fantasy future in the hands of Bryce Young, the inaccuracy, and honestly, the only hope for Deontay Johnson, Andy Dalton. A benching of Bryce Young has to be on the table here, and that would actually help him, I think. We're going to keep Zamir White, if only for Carolina this week, and he does have some non-awful stats, like he's 8th in avoided tackles, and it's not all bad. The Alexander Madison thing is a bummer. For Christian Kirk, we're trading him with this vibrant market for wide receiver 87, Christian Kirk. I'm going to throw him on my trading block and just watch all the offers come in. More like I am browsing the aisles at Dollar Tree with Christian Kirk burning a hole in my pocket. I can potentially trade Christian Kirk for some off-brand form of Pringles with a label that claims it's 100% potato, a comb which due to cost considerations only has 4 teeth, or a spatula with a label that warns that it can combust under heat. Those are my trade options for Christian Kirk.
Harsh but fair from Paul Charchian. And I will say this, guys. Paul, Chris, congrats. You guys had more receiving yards than Christian Kirk yesterday. That's what happens when you get -1 out there. So fun show, fellas. Appreciate you guys as always. And appreciate you guys out there listening to us on the Fantasy Life show. Again, we're back Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 9 a.m. Eastern. Tomorrow's show loaded with utilization report goodness and even some sheeshes as well. So enjoy Monday Night Football. And after that, we are officially on to week 3. So for Paul, for Chris, for producer Kelsey, for producer Matt, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life show. And until next time, take care, everybody.